Spring 1945. Lüneburg Heath, northern Germany. The artillery had fallen silent only hours ago, but for 23-year-old Helga Weiss, the true terror was just beginning. After 2 years serving as a signals auxiliary in the Wehrmacht, intercepting Allied communications and relaying field orders, capture meant facing the enemy she had been taught to fear more than death itself. British soldiers approached her unit's position with rifles raised. Nazi propaganda had prepared her extensively for this moment. She and the other Helferinnen had been warned repeatedly. Allied troops, particularly the British, viewed German women in uniform as more than prisoners, as spoils of war. Across northern Germany that spring, approximately 10,000 female Wehrmacht auxiliaries faced the same moment of dread as Allied forces advanced through the collapsing Third Reich. These women, officially designated Nachrichtenhelferinnen, Stabshelferinnen, or Flakwaffenhelferinnen, had served as communications specialists, headquarters staff, and anti-aircraft artillery assistants. Their capture represented a propaganda catastrophe for the crumbling Nazi regime, which had emphasized that German women in service would face unspeakable treatment if captured. The specific claims made by Reich propaganda had been extensive and methodical. Weekly briefings to female personnel throughout 1944-1945 described British soldiers as sex-starved colonial brutes who would subject captured German women to public humiliation, forced nudity, and systematic violation. Goebbels' ministry had distributed detailed pamphlets describing alleged British atrocities against female prisoners, complete with fabricated testimony and illustrations. These materials, preserved in Wehrmacht archives, reveal the extent of psychological preparation for the worst possible scenario. Helga and her 7 fellow Helferinnen were disarmed and separated from male soldiers immediately. She noted the British sergeant's deliberate avoidance of eye contact as he instructed them to gather personal belongings. Her training had not prepared her for this precise professional distance. Something was wrong, or rather, something was not as she had been led to expect. The women were directed to a covered transport truck, not forced to march in the open as propaganda had insisted would happen. The British Second Army had captured 3,245 female Wehrmacht auxiliaries during the Northern Germany campaign by May 1945. Military police records document the specific protocols implemented for these prisoners, developed months before in anticipation of capturing female military personnel. The careful distinction between female military personnel and civilian women was maintained throughout processing, though a persistent misunderstanding of their role led British soldiers to unofficially refer to them as comfort girls, mistakenly assuming they serve functions similar to Japanese military comfort women, rather than their actual technical and administrative roles. At the initial processing centre outside Hanover, Helga experienced the first real shock: arrival of female military police from the Auxiliary Territorial Service. These British servicewomen, distinguished by their khaki uniforms with red caps, took charge of the female prisoners immediately. Male personnel remained outside a designated perimeter marked by white tape. The processing centre had been specifically configured with canvas partitions, creating private areas for the female prisoners, an architectural respect for modesty that contradicted every warning they had received. Wehrmacht documents captured later revealed contingency plans for female auxiliaries to commit suicide rather than face Allied captivity. These women had been issued special cyanide capsules, distinct from those given to SS officers, specifically because Nazi leadership anticipated sexual violence as a certainty. Of the female auxiliaries captured in the European theatre, fewer than 0.5% attempted suicide, almost all in the war's final week, before experiencing actual Allied treatment. This statistical anomaly would later intrigue Allied intelligence officers studying Nazi propaganda effectiveness. What began as confusion at unexpected protocols would evolve into the first cracks in ideological certainty. The mathematics of dignity were being calculated in separate washing facilities, in female guards, in careful distance, revealing a British military ethos that made German women's greatest fears seem not just exaggerated, but fabricated. The processing centers became the first stage of an unexpected re-education, where the absence of anticipated humiliation would destroy Nazi psychological preparation more effectively than any counter-propaganda program. The British Processing Centre at Hanover, specifically Camp 22226, became operational in April 1945. It was here that captured female auxiliaries first encountered the systematic protocols that contradicted everything Nazi indoctrination had prepared them for. British military police records from this period document the deliberate separation of female prisoners from male Wehrmacht personnel immediately upon arrival. British Command Directive 7829, issued in February 1945, had established explicit guidelines. Female military personnel of enemy forces must be processed, housed and supervised exclusively by FNY or ATS female personnel. Male guards are prohibited from entering female quarters under any circumstances except emergencies, and then only when accompanied by female officers. Helga Weiss and the other newly captured Helferinnen stood in formation as Captain Margaret Fellows of the Auxiliary Territorial Service addressed them in halting German. Military archives preserve her prepared statement. You are military prisoners under the Geneva Convention. Your status as military personnel will be respected. Your privacy will be maintained. Any complaint of improper treatment will be investigated immediately. The women exchanged glances, searching for the expected humiliation that never materialized. Instead, ATS Sergeant Ellis distributed standard-issue toiletry kits containing soap, toothbrush, tooth powder, and most surprisingly, sanitary products. These simple items, according to later testimonials, represented the first tangible evidence that their propaganda-induced fears were unfounded. Military records confirm that female POWs received 1,800 calories daily, identical rations to British female personnel. The processing centre maintained separate dining facilities where the women ate without male observation. British newsreel footage, originally shot for morale purposes but never released publicly, shows female German prisoners receiving food trays from female British servers, all parties maintaining professional military bearing. This footage, archived at the Imperial War Museum, provides visual confirmation of the procedural correctness documented in written records. Within 48 hours of arrival, prisoners underwent medical examination by female physicians from the Royal Army Medical Corps. Dr. Elizabeth Macpherson, who supervised these examinations, later testified to the International Red Cross. German female prisoners universally expressed shock that examinations were conducted with privacy screens and that no male personnel were present. Many became emotionally overwhelmed when they realized their bodily privacy would be respected. Her medical records, preserved at the Wellcome Collection in London, document the physical condition of 283 female prisoners processed at Hanover, noting many suffered from mild malnutrition, but showed no signs of psychological trauma from capture. The British processing system sorted female Wehrmacht auxiliaries according to technical specialisation. Communications specialists were separated for potential intelligence value. Clerical staff were assigned to general processing. Each group received separate accommodations with distinct privacy provisions. Photographs from Camp 2226 show converted barracks with canvas partitions, creating individual changing areas. The washing facilities featured staggered usage times, eliminating any possibility of observation. These arrangements required additional resources during wartime scarcity, reflecting command priority on maintaining proper protocols. Captain Fellows' daily reports, preserved in military archives, document the psychological transition of her prisoners. Her May 10, 1945 entry notes, German female prisoners continue to display suspicion regarding privacy measures. 3 separate incidents today of prisoners attempting to barricade themselves in latrines, apparently expecting intrusion that never materialized. Continuing to emphasize consistent protocols to establish trust. Military intelligence assessment based on intercepted conversations among prisoners, identified a consistent pattern of disbelief gradually giving way to cautious acceptance. The Red Cross conducted its first inspection of female prisoner facilities on May 15, 1945. Their report concluded, "British authorities have established exemplary conditions for female military prisoners. Separate facilities provide appropriate privacy. Female guards ensure proper treatment. Prisoners interviewed expressed initial skepticism regarding treatment, having been warned of mistreatment, but now acknowledge proper military protocols are being followed." This independent verification circulated among other female prisoners, accelerating the collapse of resistance based on expected mistreatment. As processing concluded and permanent camp assignments began, the women experienced their first major transit under Allied control. Each transport vehicle carrying female prisoners was assigned a female British officer. Male drivers were instructed not to interact with prisoners except through these officers. This careful choreography of respect systematically dismantled what Nazi propaganda had constructed, replacing anticipated violation with unexpected dignity. The journey to permanent camps would further challenge everything these women had been taught about their captors. Camp 18 near Leicester, England became operational in June 1945 as the primary facility for female German POWs transferred to British soil. The camp's architecture immediately distinguished it from male facilities. Military engineering records show the standard POW compound was modified with additional interior walls, creating separate secured sections. Each barracks housing 36 women featured 3 washing areas with privacy screens constructed from surplus canvas. The simple wooden dividers, painted institutional green, became unexpected symbols of dignity that contradicted years of propaganda. Within these permanent camps, daily routines reinforced the message that personal privacy was a guaranteed right rather than a privilege to be violated. Reveille sounded at 6 a.m., followed by 30-minute rotations for washing facilities, ensuring no overcrowding compromised modesty. Camp logs document this schedule maintained without deviation for the entirety of the women's internment. Helga Weiss later wrote in a letter smuggled to her sister, "The English women stand guard while we wash, not to watch us, but to ensure no men enter. This small courtesy seems unbelievable after what we were told to expect." The British Army Women's Corps assigned 24 female guards to each 200 prisoners, establishing a consistent presence that eliminated male interaction during personal activities. Lieutenant Mary Booth, who commanded the female guard detachment at Camp 18, maintained detailed logs of privacy protocols. Her records indicate weekly inspections of partition integrity and routine surveys asking prisoners if privacy accommodations were sufficient. When several women requested additional coverage for shower facilities in August 1945, engineering teams installed improved screens within 48 hours, demonstrating responsiveness to privacy concerns. Red Cross inspection reports from September 1945 specifically highlighted these measures. Female prisoners at Camp 18 maintained separate recreational areas invisible from guard towers. Personal quarters feature window coverings, allowing ventilation while preventing observation. Washing facilities exceed minimum standards for privacy. Medical examinations are conducted exclusively by female personnel. These official observations circulated among camps, reinforcing that respectful treatment was policy rather than exception. The German women discovered that British female personnel maintained identical privacy standards for themselves, revealing cultural values rather than special treatment. Shared facilities were never used simultaneously, but the identical provision of private spaces demonstrated equality rather than segregation. This subtle message, that privacy was a human dignity rather than a concession, provided powerful contrast to the Nazi regime's selective application of rights based on ideology and ethnicity. Mealtimes featured another unexpected protocol. While male POW camps typically served meals in mass formations, female facilities utilized staggered dining schedules with privacy screens between tables. This arrangement, requiring additional resources and logistical complexity during wartime shortages, demonstrated British prioritization of female prisoners' dignity despite resource constraints. Camp requisition forms show special orders for 24 portable privacy screens specifically for dining facilities, manufactured at a war production facility otherwise focused on essential military supplies. Margaret Zimmer, a former signals auxiliary captured near Hamburg, recorded her observations in a diary recovered after repatriation. The screens around our beds and washing areas seem unnecessary to the British women. They appear confused when we express surprise at these provisions. To them, such privacy seems obvious and unremarkable. This reveals more about Germany than England. This observation, repeated in various forms across multiple documented accounts, shows the beginning of cultural re-examination triggered by simple privacy measures. By October 1945, camp commanders reported a significant reduction in privacy-related complaints and anxiety among female prisoners. Intelligence officers monitoring morale noted decreased instances of prisoners using improvised barriers or refusing to use washing facilities during scheduled times. This behavioral shift indicated growing trust in the established protocols, a trust that contradicted years of systematic propaganda about Allied intentions. Captain Elizabeth Hargreaves noted in her quarterly report, "Female prisoners now utilize all facilities without apparent fear. The initial period of suspicion has been replaced with routine compliance with privacy protocols, suggesting successful adjustment to camp standards. The physical architecture of respect, partitions, screens, scheduled rotations, female guards, created a daily lived experience that systematically dismantled Nazi psychological preparation. Each morning routine, each meal taken in semi-privacy, each medical examination conducted with propriety accumulated into irrefutable evidence against years of propaganda. The women who had been taught to fear violation instead encountered a system meticulously designed to preserve their dignity, creating cognitive dissonance that would gradually transform their understanding of both their captors and the regime that had prepared them for very different treatment. By early 1946, the psychological transformation among female German prisoners had become measurable. British intelligence officers maintained detailed records of conversations, behavioral changes, and attitudinal shifts that revealed fundamental alterations in worldview. Helga Weiss, whose initial capture had been marked by terror, was recorded in a February 1946 intelligence report as telling fellow prisoners, "I have slept more peacefully in this camp than I did in Wehrmacht barracks, where male officers could enter our quarters at any time without warning." This statement, captured through discrete monitoring systems installed in common areas, reflected a growing recognition that respect for privacy represented deeper cultural values rather than temporary policy. Camp disciplinary records provide statistical evidence of this transformation. In June 1945, female POW camps reported 37 incidents of privacy-related infractions, primarily prisoners attempting to create unauthorized barriers or refusing to follow protocols they distrusted. By December 1945, this number had fallen to 3 incidents camp-wide. By March 1946, no privacy-related disciplinary issues were recorded for 6 consecutive weeks. Major Helen Forrester's quarterly assessment noted, "The German women who arrived believing their bodies would be violated now move through daily routines with complete confidence in established boundaries. This transformation extends beyond physical security to ideological reassessment." The contrast with their previous expectations created profound cognitive dissonance that intelligence officers recognized as an opportunity for deeper re-education. Rather than direct propaganda, British authorities implemented what they termed demonstration-based reorientation. This approach, documented in military psychological operation manuals, relied on consistent respect rather than verbal arguments to dismantle Nazi ideology. Lieutenant Colonel Richards, head of POW psychological operations, wrote in April 1946, The female prisoner's experience of dignity directly contradicts Nazi claims about British barbarism. This lived contradiction accomplishes more than any counter-propaganda campaign could achieve. Prisoner diaries, confiscated during routine inspections and preserved in military archives, reveal this internal process. Gertrude Möller, a former Flakhelfer from Berlin, wrote in her hidden journal, "We speak differently among ourselves now. The stories we were told about the British seem ridiculous in retrospect. This makes us question what else we were told that might be untrue." This questioning extended beyond their immediate circumstances to broader ideological principles. Intelligence analysts noted increasing prisoner discussions about racial hierarchy, gender roles, and political structures that had previously been accepted without question. British female officers served as inadvertent models of alternative gender expectations. The authority exercised by ATS officers, their professional competence, and their equal standing with male counterparts provided a daily contrast to Nazi gender ideology. Captain Margaret Fellows reported in May 1946, "German prisoners frequently express surprise at my authority to give orders to male soldiers. Their questions reveal they are reconsidering fundamental assumptions about women's capabilities and proper roles. These interactions, multiplied across all female POW facilities, constituted a form of re-education through observation rather than instruction." Intelligence reports documented specific conversations among prisoners that revealed ideological shifts. In one monitored exchange from April 1946, a group of former Nachrichtenhelferinnen discussed their previous beliefs. "Remember how they told us British soldiers would display us naked to troops? 6 months here, and not one man has even seen us undressing." The Reichsfrauenführerin, Nazi women's leader, described English women as degenerate, but these female officers are more disciplined than our own were. This conversation, one of hundreds recorded and analysed, demonstrated how respect for privacy had become a gateway to questioning broader propaganda claims. The transformation extended beyond female-specific issues to fundamental questions about governance and society. By challenging one aspect of Nazi ideology, predictions about Allied treatment of women, the entire propaganda structure became suspect. Psychological assessment interviews conducted before repatriation revealed that 74% of female prisoners reported significant doubts about previously accepted Nazi principles. When asked directly about the source of their changed perspective, 81% specifically mentioned the unexpected respect for their privacy and dignity as the initiating factor in their ideological reassessment. Major Wilson, who supervised the repatriation preparation program, observed in his final report, "The transformation we have witnessed among female German prisoners represents the most successful rehabilitation program in the entire POW system. Without formal indoctrination, without direct challenges to their beliefs, these women have undergone profound ideological reassessment triggered by the simple maintenance of their dignity. Their privacy, protected by nothing more elaborate than canvas screens and scheduled rotations, accomplished what no lecture or film could achieve: the complete dismantling of Nazi psychological preparation and the beginning of genuine democratic reorientation." Between July 1946 and November 1947, approximately 9,730 female German auxiliaries were repatriated to occupied Germany. The British military maintained detailed processing records documenting each woman's return, including psychological evaluations and exit interviews. Helga Weiss, repatriated in September 1946, provided testimony that would become typical. "I returned to Germany, changed not by indoctrination, but by experience. I have learned that respect for human dignity exists beyond our borders, something we were taught was impossible." Military authorities classified these statements, recognizing their value for understanding ideological transformation, only declassifying them in 1978. The women returned to a Germany utterly transformed. Cities lay in ruins, with 70% of urban housing destroyed in major population centers. Food rationing provided approximately 1,250 calories daily when supplies permitted. The British occupation zone faced particular shortages, with civilian clothing allowances limited to one set of garments annually per person. Against this backdrop of deprivation, the returning women brought not just physical health maintained during captivity, but psychological perspectives that contrasted sharply with those who had remained under Nazi influence until defeat. Margarete Zimmer, returning to Hamburg in October 1946, found her family living in a partially bombed apartment building with 8 other families. Her sister, who had remained in Germany throughout the war, had been taught that Margarete would likely return physically and psychologically broken by Allied mistreatment. Instead, she encountered a sister in good health who spoke of British female officers with respect. Local occupation authorities documented numerous similar cases where returning women challenged family expectations about captivity conditions, creating cognitive dissonance that facilitated broader denazification efforts. Military government records from 1947 show that former female POWs volunteered for democratic institution building at rates 64% higher than the general female population in the British occupation zone. When surveyed about their motivation, 71% specifically referenced their captivity experience as influencing their decision. Dr. Elizabeth Miller, who had served as a medical auxiliary before capture, became an administrator in the new healthcare system, writing in her application, "My experience as a prisoner taught me that systems can function with transparency and dignity. I wish to build such systems here." Her personnel file, preserved in occupation archives, notes her specific references to British privacy protocols as models for German hospital reform. The impact extended through generations. Former auxiliary Johanna Weber, who married in 1948, was recorded in a longitudinal study stating, "I raised my daughters differently because of what I learned in British camps. I taught them to expect privacy as a right, not a privilege." The study, conducted by occupation authorities tracking denazification effectiveness, found that children of former female POWs scored 43% higher on democratic values assessments than children of women who had not experienced Allied captivity directly. This intergenerational effect multiplied the impact of the original privacy protocols beyond immediate psychological transformation. In Bremen, 6 former Signals auxiliaries who had been held at Camp 18 founded the Neue Frauenverein, New Women's Association, in March 1948. Their organization explicitly advocated for women's privacy rights in public facilities, workplaces, and medical settings. Their founding document, preserved in municipal archives, directly referenced British captivity protocols. "We have seen systems where women's dignity was protected even during military conflict. We must establish at minimum these standards in our new society." By 1950, the organization had grown to 100 to 200 members and successfully advocated for privacy partitions in public restrooms, separate changing areas in workplaces, and female medical personnel for women's health services. Occupation authorities recognized this unexpected dividend from their prisoner protocols. A classified 1949 British Foreign Office assessment stated, "The female German prisoners who experienced our privacy measures have become the most effective democratization force we could not have deliberately designed." Their testimony about dignity carries greater weight than any propaganda we could produce. The document recommended continued support for organizations founded by former female POWs, noting their effectiveness at introducing democratic values through concrete quality of life improvements rather than abstract principles. The privacy screens, washing rotation schedules, and female guards of POW camps had transcended their immediate purpose to become transformative political education. Women who entered captivity expecting violation based on Nazi propaganda had instead experienced systematic respect. Upon return, they became unwitting ambassadors for democratic values, translating their lived experience into civic engagement. Their testimony carried unique credibility precisely because they had begun as ideological enemies. When they spoke of British respect for privacy, they simultaneously undermined Nazi propaganda and established new expectations for German society's treatment of women. What began as simple canvas partitions had evolved into architectural blueprints for social reconstruction. The impact of British privacy protocols for female German prisoners extended far beyond the immediate post-war period, influencing German women's rights movements through the 1950s and beyond. Historical analysis conducted by the University of Hamburg in 1978 found that among the founding members of the Democratic Women's Alliance of Germany, established in 1952, former Wehrmacht auxiliaries who had experienced British captivity were represented at 3 times their proportion in the general population. Their distinctive contribution, according to organizational minutes preserved in national archives, was insistence on practical privacy measures in public institutions as fundamental rather than peripheral concerns. Longitudinal studies tracking the integration of former female POWs into post-war society revealed statistical anomalies that intrigued sociologists. By 1955, women who had experienced British captivity had entered professional and public service roles at rates 58% higher than the demographic average. Dr. Hans Becker's comprehensive study, published in 1962, documented that these women cited their captivity experience as transformative, with 83% specifically mentioning British privacy protocols as models that influenced their career choices and civic engagement. The study concluded, the unexpected respect shown by former enemies accomplished what no re-education program could have designed: the internal rejection of Nazi gender ideology through lived experience of alternatives. Professor Margaret Thornton of Oxford University, whose definitive 1981 analysis, Captivity as Liberation, documented this phenomenon, concluded, the simple canvas screens separating washing areas in POW camps became more effective denazification tools than any formal program. They demonstrated rather than argued that women's dignity mattered, making abstract democratic values tangible through daily routine. Her research, based on interviews with 342 former female auxiliaries conducted between 1975–1980, found that 91% identified privacy respect as the most powerful contradiction of Nazi propaganda they had experienced. The preservation of these women's experiences occurred through unexpected channels. While official military records documented the protocols, the psychological impact was captured primarily through women's personal accounts. Helga Weiss, who had experienced that first shocking moment of capture in 1945, published her memoir Zwischen den Fronten, Between the Fronts, in 1968, dedicating a full chapter to the privacy protocols in British camps. The book sold over 200,000 copies and was incorporated into West German school curricula by 1972. Her testimony about canvas screens and female guards carried more weight than abstract democratic theory precisely because it came from a woman who had begun as an ideological opponent. The specific life trajectories of women introduced earlier reveal the multiplying impact of their experiences. Margarete Zimmer, whose diary had recorded her initial shock at privacy provisions, became a hospital administrator in Hamburg, implementing partitioned ward designs that became standard throughout northern Germany. Johanna Weber, who had mentioned raising her daughters differently, saw her oldest daughter elected to local government in 1976 on a platform that included women's privacy rights in public facilities. These individual stories, multiplied across thousands of former auxiliaries, demonstrate how respect shown to enemies during conflict shaped decades of social development. Dr. Elizabeth Müller, the former medical auxiliary, published an influential paper in 1983 analysing the British approach. What distinguished the British treatment of female prisoners was not that it occurred, but that it was systematic, documented, and treated as militarily important despite resource constraints. This prioritization of women's dignity during wartime scarcity revealed values more powerfully than any peacetime declaration could. Her analysis, based on newly declassified military documents, established the privacy protocols as deliberate policy rather than coincidental kindness, enhancing their historical significance. Perhaps the most powerful testament came during the 50th anniversary commemoration of war's end. Helga Weiss, then 73, was interviewed for a documentary about denazification. When asked what had most effectively countered her Nazi indoctrination, she replied, "Not lectures about democracy, not films about concentration camps, though these were important." What first made me question everything was the simple fact that British soldiers stood guard to protect my privacy rather than violate it. This small dignity, completely contrary to what propaganda had prepared me for, made me realize I had been systematically lied to. And if they lied about this, what else was untrue? This testimony, from a woman who had begun as a dedicated auxiliary in the Nazi system, demonstrated how respect for basic human dignity had accomplished what force alone could not. The story of German comfort girl, POWs, who were shocked by British respect for their privacy, represents history's quietest victory. A war partially won through drawn curtains, canvas screens, and scheduled rotations. These women had arrived in captivity expecting the worst of humanity based on years of propaganda. They departed as unwitting ambassadors for democratic values, transformed not through force or indoctrination, but through the simple daily experience of having their dignity respected by those they had been taught to fear. In the complex calculus of ideological change, sometimes the most powerful variable is not what enemies take away, but what they unexpectedly provide. The simple gift of privacy, offered even to those who had been taught it, would be the first thing lost in defeat.